It's really interesting, this balance that you strike and that you encourage other people to strike. And I think at times it's hard for people to carry both ideas in their heads at the same time, which is this tremendous amount of self-reliance, but also this need to trust others, to take on more and more responsibility. And so how do you think about that, and how does somebody who is as self-reliant and focused on improvement as you are, and on achieving the goals set out, what is the process by which you're able to release truly, I mean, you've written about it, but really let go, and then at the same time truly empower someone to go and do?
Sure. So I would say there are a few ways to approach this. So the question of self-reliance opens up a number of related concepts. I think it's very valuable to be self-reliant so that in a worst-case scenario, you can manage your life and survive, whether that means physically in the woods, in a plane crash scenario, or in Hurricane Sandy in, say, rural Long Island where you go without power for a week, or professionally if you, say, get downsized in a company-wide firing and need to make ends meet. You should develop this skill sets and relationships that allow you to be self-reliant. However, I think there is a cult of independence that can be detrimental when people view themselves as completely independent from everything around them. And I was reading some writing of Wendell Berry's, who's a very interesting philosophical and pragmatic writer who talks a lot about agriculture. And he said that, rather than independence, we should think of responsible dependence or irresponsible dependence. We are all interdependent. And this sort of American, not uniquely American, but conventionally thought of as American concept of independence and self-reliance sometimes it gets miswielded and allows people to ignore the say, environmental consequences of their actions, which eventually comes full circle and bites them in the ass. So that's sort of part A. Part B, in terms of empowering people, I think that I'll try to keep it short. Yeah,
you don't have to. That's part A, though, in terms of the sort of global piece of it. But I'm interested in how somebody whose motor revs as high as yours does,
right,
is able to actually, this second part, to actually, you're clearly so that you clearly have developed those tools. But largely initially by yourself.
Sure.
So the training to then be sort of dependent, interdependent, however you want to say it.
Yeah.
How you broke that down for yourself.
Well, I think that there are, if you look at, say, and this isn't going to get super esoteric, don't worry, but if you look at, say, warfare.
If this audience can handle it,
okay,
go wherever
cool.
you want to go.
So I've been listening to and reading a lot about Genghis Khan.
I'm lost. Khan. Now I'm lost.
Yeah, you're lost.
Now I'm lost.
All right, no, but just in warfare, you have strategy and tactics, among other things. And so if you have tactics, which are the battlefield techniques, and then you have the strategy, which is, say, planning those different battlefields, orchestrating movement between those battlefields, choosing the battles, etc. It's a much higher level skill set. And I think for me, I was fortunate to compete in athletics and have a number of coaches who helped me develop the sort of philosophical underpinnings that would allow me, effectively Stoic philosophy, that would allow me to weather storms. Right? It's a very high-level set of principles and beliefs that allows me to weather storms and just get up after being beaten down repeatedly, which I think is at the highest level a prerequisite for everything that follows. Then, in terms of the tactics, I really didn't have many business mentors. It was mostly reading. I mean, I read books like Losing Your Virginity from Richard Branson, and then I went and read books like, what is it called? The 7-Day Weekend or something like that by Ricardo Semler, who's a really famous Brazilian entrepreneur. And I think it was Body and Soul, which was about the body shop and Anita Roddick. I read these books, highlighted the hell out of them, took copious notes, and then I just made a practice of testing these things and eventually put together my playbook that worked for me. And so it was really a function of trial and error. But for that trial and error to ultimately lead to best practices, you have to be able to get back up when you get knocked down. And that came from learning to view failure as feedback through sports and also high-level academics.
Learning to change the meaning of failure.
Exactly. Not as a terminal, the end, sort of end card on the movie of your life, but as a coach giving you feedback, or the world giving you feedback.
And you learn to do that, you think, through having some rough failures early.
Mm-hmm. And specifically through sports. I think that even if you were never an athlete or viewed yourself as an athlete, practicing some type of physical skill where to improve it is required that you fail, in sort of air quotes, to get your ass kicked by better players, for instance, is hugely psychologically strengthening. It's incredibly empowering to realize that whether it's writing, I remember, I took this seminar with John McPhee, who's
one of the great nonfiction writers who ever lived.
Just incredible.
His book about Arthur Ashe.
Oh,
is one of the my favorite
levels of the game.
Is one an essential. There's nobody listening to this who wouldn't get something out of this slim volume by John McPhee. But he also wrote about nuclear.
Everything. Plymouth Rock,
about
oranges,
everything imaginable for the New Yorker.
Canoes.
Forever. So you took a class with McPhee.
Well, I took a nonfiction writing class with McPhee as an undergraduate, and it was called The Literature Fact. And when we all got our first writing assignments back with his edits, I just remember scanning around the table and seeing people who were receiving the papers before I got mine, and I was like, oh no, this is not going to be good. And there was more red ink than the original black ink, his red ink. He had written more than we had originally put down on paper.
But, and these are Princetonians,
right? And he said, look, I don't want you guys to be really demoralized. You're already good writers, but you can be better. And I think that, unfortunately, and feel free to rein me in, but I'll just say this really briefly. In the U.S., we, as a society, seem to have arrived at a place where we believe it's empowering and helpful to other people to give them a pat on the back and a good job, even if they get 17th place. And you do not make people better by doing that. You are negatively reinforcing bad. You're positively reinforcing bad habits. And I was fortunate to have a handful of people in my life who, including my parents, of course, who cared enough, gave enough of a damn to be a hard ass. And to say, no, I'm not going to accept that because you can do better. And I know you can do better, so I'm going to help you / force you to be better.
Well, because what happens is, and I relate to this, you don't have kids yet, but I have 2 kids, right? Mm-hmm. So you think about this stuff a lot as you have them. And if you're observant, and as writers, we end up being observed, whether we want to or not. There's a part of the way that we, even when we're fully engaged, there's a little part of us that's observing.
Sure.
And I've thought a lot about the participation trophy. Mm-hmm. I've really thought a lot about this. And I know where it came, having being a kid of the 70s, I understand where it came from. And actually, like many ideas, it came from a very noble and good place. If you think about the legacy of the 50s, mm-hmm. the legacy of post-war, like, achievement at all costs, drill sergeant type coaches, kids who were outcasts, who weren't just told they're playing badly, you have to perform better, but who were told they were losers and weak and would never amount to anything, right? Mm-hmm. Because the second half of what happened in the 70s and 80s, the kind of personal improvement talk, the sort of wider acceptance of the validity of some kind of psychological practice being useful, the sort of actually considering the effect of the ways we talk to kids, which wasn't even written about pre-World War II, right? Mm-hmm. And so, you had Janice Ian writing songs like it's at 17 about not being picked for the basketball team and feeling like an ugly loser. Mm-hmm. And you can see why then people thought, what they should have done, the way to remediate that is, let's speak to these kids who don't win differently. Mm-hmm. Let's give them a different message about not winning. But instead it became, Let's make them all winners. And the problem with that, I agree with you, Tim, is I would watch with my kids early on. They knew it was a joke when they would get a participation trophy.
Right.
They hated it.
Yeah.
And you would watch the parents who encouraged it, and you would see something in these kids die.
Yeah. Huh?
And you're telling them, we don't think you can ever be good enough to win.
Mm-hmm.
And now for me, I'm a liberal. So, and I really believe in that there has to be a way to help people make the playing field even. But as a culture, I agree we've just taken it too far. And look, what you do in your work is try to tell people, I think, here are ways in which you can even the playing field.
Yeah, or the way I might put it is, here's a way you can get extraordinary results with mediocre raw materials. And I think people underestimate that. And the way, in my mind, to empower people is, like you said, with your kids who know on some level that this participation trophy is a joke and it sort of devalues the entire thing. If you sit down, I'll give you an example, and this might be a bit of a harsh example for some people, but I've watched tens of thousands of people attempt various diets, and even helped with some research with startups and UC Berkeley with doing randomized studies. Like, I've seen a ton of data about what works and what doesn't, what persists and what doesn't in diet. And at the end of the day, if you sit down with someone who is morbidly obese, knows there's a problem, and you tell them, you know what, it's okay. It's not your fault. None of this is your fault because of society this and genetics that. On some level, they know that's bull. And they don't need someone to enable the rationalization of their condition by saying that type of thing. And when I've said to people, for instance, through the books, which I do in the 4-Hour Body, because I've been a big boy before, I'm 170 now, but I've been 220. I mean, not, morbidly obese, pre-diabetic, but I like peanut butter sandwiches and pizza and ice cream and all that stuff. When I sit down with someone, I'm like, look, okay, cool, like, I can help you. This is not a mystery. Like, biochemistry can be hacked, and there are very basic tools. If you want to lose 20 pounds in a month or lose 200 pounds in total, I can show you exactly how to do that, and it's replicable. This has been done by thousands of people. But first, like, you are fat. It's a consequence of certain micro behaviors, and we have to fix those micro behaviors. And they're like, cool, I got it. Right? It's like, you don't have to be worried about their head exploding and their ego shattering because I say, look, you're fat. Like, let's just get on the same page first. It's not because you're big boned. It's not because of, society's pressures. Like, you eat M&Ms before you go to bed. You're fat. So, like, let's fix it.
One of the great ways you can build rapport with somebody is by, when they know that you have their best interests at heart, you can being honest is a really powerful tool. I remember...
if you care. If it's clear that you care.
I mean, as a director, I think a lot about how to talk to actors, and I think in the beginning... And every actor is different, and you do think about each person psychologically. Yeah. I mean, if you're doing this well, like Steve Nash talks about being a point guard and how you really look at each player. But I've talked to various actors who've worked with Woody Allen, and forgetting Woody Allen's personal life for a minute, Woody Allen as a director is one of the greats who ever lived. And Woody Allen just goes up to them after a take. Sometimes he goes, that was terrible. It's, hard to imagine being an actor on the receiving end of that. But in a way, it's saying, look, we're in it together. I picked you to do the movie. We have to solve this. We have to solve this this problem together. So that makes total sense to me. But I want to return, to, because
I look for the same thing with my writing. By the way, when I ask friends who are good writers for feedback, the biggest disservice they could give me is by saying, "Oh yeah, no, this is really great. This is nice. Like, good luck." But they secretly think that paragraphs 6, 14, and 12 are pieces of shit. I need to hear that.
I cannot tell you how important what you just said is in any area of professional development. And especially writer. I have people tweeting me all day about this, asking me this question all day long. And it's like, because I'll say to people, don't get feedback from people who you know are going to be destructive. It's like the Julia Cameron thing. If you know there are people who are going to hate it because some part of them is competitive with you, don't show it to them. Right. But once you decide, I'm in the zone of comfort and safety, I need feedback from this person. You want the most limited positive feedback possible. This can work. Here's why this can work. Here are the problems. I only want, when I send something to a professional, I want them to rip me to shreds. The work, I know it's not me they're ripping to shreds. It's the work. They're giving me their time. And that's essential.
Well, it's like a good CEO. I mean, many have said this in different words, but one of the CEOs I work with said, I don't want to hear about all the good stuff. He's like, tell me about the bad stuff, because the good stuff will just take care of itself.
Right. But I'm interested in how you...